Hello, and welcome to the IIUSA Eb5 Investor Market webinar series. My name is Mackenzie Penton. I'm the Director of Events and Business Development with IIUSA, or Invest in the USA, and we are your webinar hosts for today. As you know, and as you can see here, today's topic is the South African investor market. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer. As it's noted here, this webinar is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice in any way. You should always consult your own legal counsel with questions or concerns on this topic. However, all the information in this webinar is deemed to be accurate and up to date as of the recording date. Please note that we do have a chat function chat's been disabled, but we do have a Q&A function for attendees' use, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Before we go ahead and get started, I wanted to quickly thank, or perhaps not quickly, but thank our sponsors for this important event. IIUSA is the national and truly international not-for-profit membership association for professionals in the Eb5 industry. As you can see on your screen here, these are just a handful of our members based in the United States and around the world who have signed up to support this important endeavor as we look to educate investors throughout South Africa. So thank you to our sponsors and participants. More information on IIUSA members can be found on our website at iiusa.org. I also want to take a moment to thank our partners on this event. As you'll see, we've worked collaboratively with the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Nelson Mandela Business Chamber. Their support for this event has been integral in its success, and I know many of the participants for today's call are members of one of these three chambers. We look forward to returning to in-person events in South Africa and are very excited to travel to all three of these beautiful areas for in-person events, hopefully soon. As I noted earlier, the Q&A function is enabled, so you can find that at the bottom of your screen. Our panelists will periodically pause to answer relevant questions as they come in, but have also reserved time at the end of their panels to answer those as well. Our first panel of the day is Eb5 Updates, Challenges, and Opportunities. Before I turn things over to the panel, I did want to note that this is, as I said, the first panel of the day, but we do have two panel discussions scheduled, so please be sure to stay tuned for both. With that, I want to turn it over to Joseph Barnett, who's our moderator for today's discussion. Joseph is a partner at WR Immigration and will be leading us through this important discussion. So Joey?
Thank you, Mackenzie. Very nice to have you all on the line today, listening in from South Africa and the millions of viewers and listeners on YouTube once this gets posted. It's an honor to be here today. As Mackenzie said, my name is Joseph Barnett. My clients and everyone else on the panel calls me Joey. I'm a partner at WR Immigration. I've been practicing in Eb5 for about a decade now, and I'm on IIUSA's editorial committee, which is why I'm probably speaking today. Our firm has helped thousands of families get green cards through Eb5, and I'm talking to you from Los Angeles, sunny Los Angeles, California. We have an excellent panel today. And I think this is a perfect way to describe the state of Eb5 right now when we talk about challenges and updates. Coming out of a COVID lockdowns, there's a lot of opportunity in Eb5 right now and a lot of interest. More interest in the past few months than really all of 2020 when people were stuck at home. And we have this incredible panel of experienced Eb5 professionals who will help us all discuss the current status of the program and help you guys make informed decisions, because it is still true that the American dream can still be fulfilled. And Eb5 is one of the ways to get there. So without any further ado, Winnie, why don't you start? Please introduce yourself and where you're from and talk a little bit about your regional center. And I ask you all to limit it to 30 seconds to a minute. Winnie?
Sorry, mute button. Still getting used to Zoom, I guess. Well, hello, and my name is Winnie Ng, and I am the CEO and Chief Counsel of the Manhattan Regional Center. I'm an immigration attorney myself. but now I'm practicing in-house. I was working in a business and immigration law firm before, and assisting investors and regional centers and projects for both regional center and direct Eb5 program. But now I'm very happy to be able to bring actual products to be on the project side and to be able to craft projects the way that I think it's the safest for investors, and be able to see investors through the process until they get their money back. And our projects are based in New York, on New York City, but I'm located here in California at our California office.
Excellent. Thank you, Winnie. Kai.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Fellow panelists, I want to thank IIUSA and the chambers and chambers of commerce who are supporting this endeavor. Certainly thanks to all of you for being part of this and allowing it to happen. Cmb Regional Centers is the organization that I work for. I'm vice president, have been with the company since 2010. And CMB represents some 5,800 families from around the world, from 102 different countries, for their Eb5 pursuits. We have been in the business since 1997. We're one of the oldest and most active, and certainly by many accounts, one of the most successful regional centers in the space. My role with the company is that of vice president. Started out as vice president of Asia, and has since morphed into certainly wearing more hats than just an Asian hat. It includes South Africa, the African continent. It includes other parts of the world. My role is to manage the relationships of the investor and the investor's representatives around the world, and bringing the information and the important ideas behind every CMB Eb5 offering, and to help people to decide if Eb5 is right for them, and to work them through the process from the very beginning of doing their due diligence and examining the project and the offering documents, all the way through to the point where they're working with their attorneys or their representative agency, the placement agency, all the way through the conclusion, and that is the permanent residence card and return of capital. And again, I've been with CMB since 2010. Since I started here, the company was very small. It had about 42 investors. Now we're over 5,800. And so the company's grown quite large during that period of time. So glad to be here. Thank you very much again, Joey, for moderating. And thanks to Mackenzie and IIUSA for putting the event on.
Always a pleasure to be speaking with you, Kai. Brent, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you to the Johannesburg and Durban and Nelson Mandela Chamber of Commerce's for partnering with IIUSA for us to be able to present this information to the citizens of South Africa. Very much appreciated. I've been involved in the Eb5 industry, managing and operating regional centers for approximately 9 years now. Before that, I had over a decade of experience in banking and finance. The regional center, Green Mountains Regional Center, while relatively new, has a experienced team of professionals from our legal counsel down to the developers that we work with. Currently, we are offering a luxury real estate home property project that received expedited exemplar approval in October of 2020. So we're very excited about this project, not only that it had an expedited exemplar approval, but also that it's in a rural TEA. And although some areas of the United States are being negatively impacted by the pandemic, real estate sales for the type of real estate development that this project is are very, very robust. So I look forward to speaking to all of you with all the other members on this expert panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. And last but certainly not least, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Joey, and everyone for joining today's session. And thank you to IIUSA and Chamber of Commerce to facilitate this. My name is Aaron Chijekta. I'm the Managing Director at Golden Gate Global. We are a regional center and a real estate investment firm based in not so sunny right now, San Francisco, California. I started my career as a corporate attorney before moving into the EB5 realm. And our firm right now specializes in structured financing with over 1 billion under management, but the core of our business is EB5. I'm also a director at IIUSA's board of directors, and it's a pleasure to provide you some crucial and fundamental information about EB5. But of course, we will be, I'm sure all of our fellow panelists will be available for questions afterward, anytime where we're hopefully our resources to you going forward. Thank you.
All right, so let's dive into it. And just as Mackenzie mentioned, we do have a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So if you have questions, we can answer them during our discussion or have a session afterwards. So EB5, it's a specific visa for immigrant investors. And I don't want to say there's a typical type of investor, but a lot of them are businessmen, businesswomen, entrepreneurs, high net worth individuals. Also students, children, where the parents want to give their children a better opportunity in the United States, maybe once they graduate or prior to graduating from college. And many in South Africa are looking at EB5 because of the political and economic instability in South Africa. And the market for EB5 has grown significantly in the past few years. And I know a lot of people have been going out to South Africa. I've been there a few times, meeting with clients and drawing up interest and teaching people about the process. So it's great to be on this call. EB5 is an investment and job creation program, and it's helped finance a lot of different types of projects. As Brent said, from luxury residential to student housing developments, to distribution centers, sports arenas, hotels, retirement homes. It goes on and on and on. And it's an excellent part of foreign direct investment into the United States. And Mackenzie, let's just get right into the basics. So Kai, can you just generally say what's the purpose of the EB5 program? You know, why do you call it a job creation program with an immigration benefit?
Thank you, Joey, and to our guests. At its fundamental core, EB5 was authored in the 1990s to create jobs for American workers. And that's a requirement to obtain the immigration benefit is the requirement to create at least 10 jobs as a result of the EB5 investment. So at its core, it is a jobs creation program for America. That's what's in it for the United States, is that direct foreign investment and the job creation. But the benefit for the participants, and only those who are foreign nationals are able to participate in the EB5 visa program, the benefit for the participants is that opportunity to earn a private or a permanent residence card and a permanent green card for themselves and their immediate family members. So when you track back from that, and let's look at again what has been the result of this program. Since 2008, the EB5 program has generated or has attracted 40 billion. That's with a B, more than 40 billion in foreign direct investment. That works. And so then when you compute how many American jobs were created as a result of that foreign direct investment and the program itself, the IIUSA computation shows that more than 731,000 jobs have been created through the EB5 program. So the idea of this job creation program that would allow for a immigration benefit for someone who would invest in the United States, put that capital to work in the U.S. economy, and create American jobs has been an overwhelming success. It's a program that's a good program, and it works.
Thank you, Kai. You and I were in South Africa a few years ago, and you used that term, a job creation program with an immigration benefit, and that's stuck with me because I think it so aptly describes really the true purpose of EB5. So Winnie, why don't you take us through sort of high-level basic EB5 requirements?
Sure. So as listed on the slide, it can be seen broken down into three major categories of regarding the requirements for EB5. The first is that the required investment amount needs to be invested in what is called a new commercial enterprise. We call it NCE a lot of times, and where the investor owns an actual membership interest in that enterprise. And so the current minimum investment amount is 900,000 in what is called a TA targeted employment area and or rural area, and I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later. And in a non-targeted employment area, the minimum investment amount is 1.8 million right now. And as Kai mentioned, one investment would be for the whole entire family. So that would include the investor, his or her spouse, and any children under age 21 at the time of their filing, as long as there's no visa backlog. Sorry. And these investors would need to, all investors would need to prove that the source of their funding is derived from a lawful source. And the second point is about job creation. Since this is a job creation program, the main focus is on that, whether or not the investment that the investors put into that new commercial enterprise has created 10 will create, first of all, when you, let me get a sip of water, sorry. So when investors put, first invest their money and submit the petition, they have to show USCIS that their investment will create 10 full-time jobs for qualified US employees, which is defined as 10 US employees are defined as US residents, US citizens, permanent residents, or other immigrant that are lawfully authorized to work in the US. But for the regional center program, which most of investors invest in, jobs can be direct, indirect, or induced, and they will be calculated by an economic methodology. So you don't have to count direct employees, which is a great benefit, because for the direct regional center program, the jobs will have to last until investors file their I-829 petition, which may be 4 to 5 years after the time they put in their initial investment. But the regional center program, because we're using the economic methodology, for example, for construction jobs that last over 2 years, you just have to prove that you've expended a certain amount of money, and with the economic methodology, they will have a multiplier, and it will come out with a number of direct, indirect, and induced jobs that these expenditures is believed to have created. And so it's a much safer program than the direct regional center program for job creation purposes. So as long as the project is successful, at the stage after their 2-year conditional green card, they have to prove that they have created the 10 jobs. And if they do, then the whole family, the investor and the family, will be able to get their permanent green cards. And the third requirement is that the investment must be at risk, and it's from the time they invest all the way until they finish their 2-year conditional permanent residency period. And so this is about, as I mentioned, it may be about 4 to 5 years until they can get their money back.
Great, thank you, Winnie. And so the way that it works with EB5 is that investors pool their money into a new commercial enterprise, and that new commercial enterprise provides financing to a US company or a developer to do the project. And all of the jobs that are created from that project can count towards the job creation for the EB5 investors. Aaron, can you explain to us what a regional center is, and specifically its role in structuring these types of deals with new commercial enterprises? Do you invest in a regional center, or do you invest through a regional center?
Sure, and the technical definition for it is a regional center is an entity designated by the USCIS, which is the immigration authority in the US, to pool funds from EB5 investors for investments into these so-called new commercial enterprises, which in turn invest in the job creating entities, or which are called JCEs, in which in many cases means the real estate developers, construction firms, or the borrowers of the EB5 loan, and thereby creating jobs within the US economy. So in basic terms, I mean, Vinny touched on a lot of points about direct versus regional center program. I'll mention one aspect, which is the fund manager aspect, right? The regional center acts together with basically the NCE that they're managing, are acting as a fund manager, as in many offerings that you see today. I mean, if you were to invest in any private offering in the United States or anywhere in the world, you would probably have a fund manager that would just basically control and protect the rights of the subscribers, and be able to then report and also provide information to their investors about their investment. So that is an important function that the regional center does when you invest in an EB5 project. In addition to all the benefits or all the immigration-related requirements that a regional center has to fulfill, a regional center also provides several additional investor-related functions, which is reporting. A lot of us, I'm sure, in the panel as well employ similar practices. Is every quarter you provide investor reports, you provide construction updates. In addition to that, we employ third-party construction consultants, third-party fund administration, etc., to add layers to protect investors' funds. So as an EB5 investors, would like to communicate that you are not just at the mercy of a program or just several people that are just kind of managing your money, but more than that, there are layers and sufficient kind of structures, checks and balances included in this to protect your funds and the job creation as well. And to Joey's point or question about whether you invest into the EB5 fund or through that fund, my I think response about the fund management is kind of address that, because you invest eventually into you invest in the fund and become a member of the NCE, but that fund invests all these pooled funds into the job creating enterprise. In return, you get the benefits as an investor for the job creation and the immigration goals. So it is a kind of A to B to C structure, which is very well structured in a lot of these regional centers today that you meet today or see in the industry, have employed really robust structures to be able to protect your funds and immigration goals today.
Thank you, Aaron. And Winnie, you touched on the mention of a TEA, which is short for a targeted employment area. And whether a project is in a targeted employment area will impact the minimum investment amount. And for most regional center projects, if not all of them, they try to locate within a TEA so that investor can qualify at that 900K level. Brent, can you describe, what qualifies as a targeted employment area and why that's important for investors?
Sure. So a targeted employment area, as you've mentioned, are different areas of the United States where the threshold for investment for an investor to be eligible for the EB5 visa is dropped down to now the lower $900,000 amount, as opposed to the usual $1.8 million. These investment amounts took effect in November of 2019, along with some new regulations around how a TEA is defined. And there's two types of TEAs. One is a high unemployment area, and it's defined as areas having unemployment more than 150% above the national average as calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The second type of TEA is a rural TEA, and that's defined as an area outside a metropolitan statistical area. So as I just mentioned, in November of 2019, USCIS rules changed. They made it much more stringent for the high unemployment areas, so that the terminology that the government used, that you would be limited in census tracts to be able to calculate a TEA. You would have to have directly adjacent census tracts to the project to determine whether or not it met the high unemployment definition of a TEA.
Great, and I think that was part of furthering Congress's intent to incentivize investment where there is high unemployment, and making sure that, and in rural areas for that matter, that's where the U.S. wants this money to be focused. That's why that investment amount has been lowered. And before we move to the next slide, I just want to make two more comments. Winnie, you mentioned lawfully obtained capital. The money that is invested into the United States must be demonstrated to be lawfully sourced and transferred over to the United States. So for South African investors, that's working with your in-country accountants and making sure that you get your Sars clearance to transfer the funds out. That's very important. You really should be working with an experienced immigration attorney to prepare your source of funds part of the application. And then just to the last point, direct versus Eb5 Regional Center. I would say overwhelmingly, probably over 90% of folks who do Eb5 go through a regional center, as opposed to doing a direct Eb5. And I think there are a lot of practical difficulties involved with doing a direct investment where you are investing in your own company that you're supposedly somehow to manage when you're abroad. And it's very difficult to do that. And so many of my clients go towards the regional center aspect as opposed to direct. And just I don't like reading on there what's on there, but with Eb5, you can live wherever you want in the United States. You don't need to live where the project is. You get the right to work wherever you want, or if you just want to hang out at the beach and drink margaritas, you have that ability as well. And so that's the benefit of Eb5. You don't need a family sponsor. You don't need an employer to sponsor you, like many of the other ways to get a green card through Eb5. Any other final points that anybody wants to raise here? Okay, well, we can move on to the next slide too. That's no problem. So we got a new president, January of 2021. And with the new Biden administration, there are new policies in place, reforms to be put in. And as we saw with President Trump, a president has a lot of leeway when it comes to making US immigration policy. And one of the quotes that I read recently, which I really liked, was that Trump kind of locked the doors and put a bunch of locks. And now Biden is going through the process of finding the keys to unlock the doors so that folks can come back in. And so, Brent, maybe you can give us just an overall, what are President Biden's main immigration priorities, as he said on the campaign, and how does that relate to Eb5?
Yeah, so at the macro level, with how it relates to Eb5, President Biden has not only introduced executive orders immediately, but made statements that he wants to restore faith in our legal immigration system and promote integration of new Americans. So he believes that immigrants are essential to who we are as a nation. Immigrants built this country, and that they're critical to our aspirations for the future. So his strategy is really based upon putting in place a fair, safe, and orderly immigration system that welcomes immigrants, that functions in a way that doesn't create hardships or unnecessary hardships for immigrants coming to the country, because he knows that Americans fuel our economy. Immigrants are innovators, they're job creators, and they're essential to the United States of America, not only the economy, but our arts and culture as well. And he has supported the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. And there's substantial sections of that act that work to clear the employment and family-based green card backlogs, which is vitally important to people that are looking to invest in EB5.
Thank you. Yeah, that U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 is over 350 pages to read. It's incredibly dense, and it lists out a lot of priorities for President Biden and for the Democrats who now control Congress. But it's also possible that rather doing something comprehensive, they may go to piecemeal legislation and look at immigration on a issue by issue basis. And that's something that we're just going to have to be keeping our eye out, and including what we're going to talk about in a moment about EB5 legislation. The other thing that I just want to mention, and Brent made a good point, being more welcoming to immigrants as part of a national policy. President Biden has ended some of the travel bans that President Trump put in place, the quote unquote Muslim travel ban, people from certain countries, that has been removed. Some of the other bans that were put on because of COVID have also been removed or substantially subsided since Biden has come into power. And as I said, he's unlocking those locks that Trump put in. And one of the things that he is doing to do this is leading the Department of Homeland Security. So Kai, can you tell us a little bit about Alejandro Mayorkas and his relationship with EB5 and what he's doing now?
Certainly, Joey, thank you. Alejandro, or Ali Mayorkas, is a pretty talented individual. Special note, he himself is an immigrant. His parents came to the United States from Cuba shortly after the Cuban Revolution. So Mr. Mayorkas was a very small child. The family ended up in California, and Mr. Mayorkas is really an American success story, if you will. He studied at UC Berkeley. He's a very talented student. After law school, he worked as assistant state's attorney and then U.S. attorney for Central California District, where he specialized in white-collar crime. And important to note is that white-collar crime, he had gotten himself a kind of a badge, if you will, that said that he was a specialist in money laundering, which is especially important in EB5 if you refer back to Winnie's idea of source of funds, and that includes path of funds. So he's especially tenured in that aspect. President Obama, part of the transition team, included Mr. Mayorkas, and then he was appointed director of the USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, in 2009. He went then to become Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, and now under the Biden administration, he's been appointed Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Has a cabinet position, but the question really goes to what's his relationship with EB5. So Mr. Mayorkas is a pretty talented individual. I think he's very capable from what I've seen, but during his time with the USCIS, he stubbed his toe on some situations within EB5. There were some whistleblowers from the USCIS that actually had claimed that Mr. Mayorkas had outstepped his boundaries and stepped in on behalf of some regional center projects. One happened to be in relationship to Terry McAuliffe, who is related to the Clinton family. The other one was a casino project in Las Vegas with a very, very powerful senator from Nevada, and the other one was in Los Angeles, and it had to do with films and where the movies were made and whether or not they qualified for the EB5 investment. Well, Mr. Mayorkas stepped in and he personally managed the approval of these particular projects. So the whistleblowers, they contacted the Office of Inspector General, and the Office of Inspector General did an investigation. And actually that was almost directly 6 years ago, in March of 2015, that report came out, citing that, and I'm not going to make any opinions here, I'll let you read the report, but it's available online. But it delineated some of what the whistleblowers had said about EB5 and Mr. Mayorkas's involvement in EB5. To Mr. Mayorkas's defense, he said, "Hey, I saw some problems and I went to fix it." And And I think that that's probably true. Whether or not he stepped out of his boundaries, again, I'll let you make that decision. But he identified that EB5 program was broken, and he would like, obviously, he wanted to fix it. And I don't think that that's any different today. So I see that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, that cabinet position, has already given a glimpse of what he's willing to do. And we'll talk about this in the Wolf and Bering lawsuit a little bit later. But he went in and he confirmed the regulations that were signed by by Director Wolf at the time, and so he went in and he said that no, these new regulations, I affirm them, and because they helped clean up EB5. So we're seeing that Mr. Mayorkas is a friend of EB5. He wants it as much as we do to see that there are ethics that are put in, that there is the program stands on its own 2 feet, that it has credibility, and that the investors who participate are protected. And he's made it clear that that's what he wants to do. So I think Mr. Mayorkas is probably the right choice. Whether or not that's political or not, I'll leave that to the viewer. But again, I think he's a very capable individual, and he's an American success story. He himself is an immigrant who's come to the United States, so he's got a feel for it. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you, Kai. Yeah, I think I take his appointment and confirmation as great news as well. He certainly knows about EB5, which I don't know if Chad Wolf and others who headed up DHS under President Trump did. And I certainly take that as a positive sign. So one of the things that's on everybody's mind in EB5 is this end of June 2021 expiration date or sunset date. Aaron, can you just kind of talk a little bit about the short-term nature of the Regional Center program and what IIUSA is doing to get a long-term reauthorization? And before you go, I realize that it's already 7:36 my time here in California, so we have a lot to cover in the next 10, 15 minutes. So let's try to keep the rest of this side a little brief. Thank you.
Sure. So basically, what the expiration date for Regional Center program is, that for the audience here, EB5 program is a permanent program. There's no sunset to that. But the Regional Center program, which Joey mentioned that about 95% of all the EB5 investors choose to go with instead of a direct EB5, that because of its nature, legislative nature, it requires to be renewed. And this was never a problem in the past. It has renewed, I think, 18 or 19 times in the past because it was attached to an omnibus bill, which then, because it's a must-pass bill, like the budget bill, and that's why it was always extended without any issues. The only difference this time around is that late 2020, it was decoupled from the omnibus bill, which means now EB5 legislation, the Regional Center program, is by its own. And that was the reason that a lot of people started talking about the June 30th, the expiration date. Well, although this may be some sort of a concern for the industry or a newcoming investor, we, or the IIUSA, as our organization, are very optimistic because we have been putting a lot of effort and energy into modernizing, reforming EB5, and we have been always supporters of that effort. And the latest and the biggest of that effort took a shape of a bill, and that is called the Eb5 Reform and Integrity Act, sponsored by Senators Grassley and Leahy. And that was introduced to Senate into 2021 this year. And it does a couple of things, but the most important aspects of it is that it reauthorizes the program for a 5-year term, which will be then renewed, and then which makes the program effectively permanent, and also adds on integrity measures to the program that protects the investors, and also ensures that there is a high level of standards for companies like us, the regional centers, as well as all the industry players, to uphold the standards that other U.S. institutions in similar format are subject to. So that is why This is a very important step today. We are very optimistic because we have lobbied and we have worked with a lot of different lawmakers and people in power to be able to enact this before June 30th. So it is more likely than not, and call me an optimist, that this will be enacted by the June 30th date. Another thing that could happen is if for some reason that is delayed, the Eb5 program as its own could be attached to another vehicle and extended by itself to allow the Eb5 program to continue, which, as I said, happened in the past as well. And that could easily happen by just changing the date on it. What if there's a gap between the time that the June 30th, the expiration, and the new legislation come into force? Is that this actually happened in the past, and Joy can kind of enlighten you from an attorney's perspective as well. But USCIS continued to accept new I-526 or new petitions, but they haven't acted on them. So they start processing when it's time, or when the new legislation comes, or when the program is renewed. So it's a kind of a temporary lapse, which hasn't disturbed the program much. So we as an industry are obviously very optimistic and working hard to be able to get the Integrity Act enacted very soon. But I would say from an investor standpoint, one, it's a very positive thing that the industry is kind of stepping up and becoming even more qualified program. And two, maybe it also makes sense to go ahead and invest before June 30th, because that would potentially protect you from any change as well, because you as a bona fide investor have made an attempt to invest before that date. And with this Democratic administration, it will more likely than not will be protected as well. So those are my kind of highlights. I know our time is limited. We can talk about it for hours, but I think this should be enough for this topic.
Thanks, Aaron. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to speak briefly about this Bering v. Wolf lawsuit. This has to do with the modernization regulations that were implemented in 2019. There's a lawsuit to challenge them, potentially move the price back down to 500K. But as Kai mentioned, there was a ratification that was signed by Secretary Mayorkas, and we're all waiting to see what the court will decide. But I think we can all kind of expect the minimum investment amount to stay at 900K or 1.8 million if you're not in the TEA. So let's move on to the next slide, which talks about the Eb5 process, which I love talking about, and then USCIS processing times, which is my least favorite topic to talk about. But I think it's important on your end because from an investor point of view, because you need to have an overall US immigration strategy, something short-term, something long-term. You guys have school, you have work, you have investments that you're looking out for, and it's important that you have a realistic expectation of the process. So I'm going to just go down to that third bullet point first. Once your initial application is approved, Kai, what's sort of the next step in the process? If and again, I apologize that we're running out of time, so let's just try to keep these answers relatively short.
Joey, it would be to become documentarily eligible, and so to supply the information that's required to the National Visa Center, and they accumulate all that information and then pass it forward to the local embassy or consulate, and then the invitations for an interview, to schedule an interview, come out from there. But documentarily eligible means that all the documents that will be required at that face-to-face interview at the local consulate will be present before the interview, so that the package is in the hands of the consulate officer, and so that it becomes ready for you when you make your appointment and visit the consulate. They don't need to chase around and get some additional documents. If that happens, then you have to go and chase down those documents and reschedule an appointment. And with the COVID-19 situation, where there's limited embassy and limited consulate scheduled interviews, because they're on open as they can be based upon the the COVID-19 situation in the country or in the local area, then it may be very, very difficult to reschedule an appointment. So be ready when you go and have all the documents that are required available, and then make your appointment at the consulate.
Thanks, Kai. And so you would make an appointment at the U.S. consulate in Johannesburg. If you're in South Africa, it's the only consulate there that issues immigrant visas. You go in, you'll get visas put into your passports. They'll be good for 6 months. When you enter the United States using those passports and that visa, they'll stamp your passport, welcome to the United States. That's what starts your conditional green card. You have 2 years of conditional green card status, where, as I mentioned before, you can live, work wherever you'd like. And Brent, what happens after that 2-year period is up to remove the conditions? Can you tell us what is required at that time?
Sure. So in the most general sense, to have their conditional green card status removed and changed to permanent resident status, the investor must file an I-829 petition with USCIS within 90 days of the expiration of their CLPR status. Once USCIS approves the I-829 petition, the applicant's status is no longer conditional. It's permanent once approved. The I-829 petition, in general, must demonstrate to USCIS that the foreign national has made an investment in a U.S. commercial enterprise in accordance with the Eb5 visa program, and the contents of the I-829 petition will need to include proof that the Eb5 investment generated the necessary job creation. And again, I'm talking at a very high level, high altitude level here. So it's important that there's more detailed requirements. So it's very important that investors choose an immigration attorney that's experienced with Eb5 petitions, attorneys such as you, Joey. I just want to, really stress that fact upon people, that if they think that this is something that they can submit to the government, it really is a document that you want to make sure that you have an expert working on.
As an add-on to that, Joey and Brent, you must provide evidence that the investment has been sustained through that current that conditional residency period. So that's all part of that, and that the sustainment also comes from the regional center. Will provide the documents with the I-829 petition to the filer that shows that the money went into the new commercial enterprise, that the money was utilized for job creation, and that investment remained until the conclusion of the conditional residency period.
Thank you both. Let's move on to the next slide in the interest of time, because I want to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on Eb5. And I'm not going to read what's out there. You guys can read it. But Aaron, maybe you can give just a sort of a breakdown of how COVID has maybe impacted the Eb5 market. And then what I want to do is kind of just go around, give everybody maybe 30 seconds or so to a minute to kind of explain, characteristics of Eb5 projects that you believe are good to alleviate any of the concerns that, sort of rose up economically with COVID and how that impacts Eb5 projects. So Aaron,
I'm going to state the obvious really quick. With the impact of COVID-19, obviously everybody stayed put, right? So whenever something like this happened in every industry, people don't want to move, people don't want to move their money, and this is to a certain degree what happened in Eb5 in prior years, when applications go above and beyond the 10,000 visa cap into 2020, that remained way under it. And that's a good indicator that people were not at the liberty of moving their money or their families to another country. But what it did was also allowed more visa capacity to be available for all the visa categories, right? Because no one, not for Eb5, but no one moved around. And also there were a lot of kind of restrictions in terms of moving or immigrating to another country as well. So that allowed more visas to be available. the following year, so this year. So I think that's a positive thing. It's a silver lining. Whether or not that's going to impact the South African market, probably not, because the visa availability does not impact South Africans. There's no backlog. There's no sort of any kind of slowdown or restrictions beyond the regular processing times for South Africans, so that there's no issue there. But right now, since the President Biden got elected, and two, since the restriction or the restrictions have been started to ease in a lot of places because of the increased vaccination, etc., people started thinking about this more. And we're getting, obviously, attorneys getting more interest. We are, as regional centers, are getting more calls and interest for EB5. So it is becoming, again, an interesting time and an active time for EB5. So I'm just going to leave it there to allow the other topic to kind of follow through, Joey, which you mentioned, I think, to talk about projects.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. Winnie, why don't you go and maybe just kind of explain, the question was, characteristics of an EB5 project that sort of help alleviate some of the concerns that may have been caused through COVID.
Sure. So I think you have to really look at the project's viability itself, and COVID has definitely impacted a lot of different markets. And when you look at projects that can survive through COVID, those are the projects that investors at this point, I think, should be looking at. For example, our projects are in New York City, and projects that are attractive and that we see viable right now, such as our current project. We see a strong that it's a strong project. It's a luxury apartment. It's still in New York City, but it's going to be the two tallest towers in the area in Queens, in Central Queens. It's going to be the rent is going to be much cheaper than what it is in Manhattan. So when I look at this project before we wrote it out, I see a very strong project because for COVID impact, for example, that a lot of people have lost their jobs or markets are not as stable, and so they can't afford the high rent that's in Manhattan right now. So for a project like this, that's much cheaper and much more affordable for tenants, it's a lot of the people who are impacted by COVID will probably consider this project and want to move into these apartments instead of paying higher rent and probably get less amenities and less space in Manhattan. So I think each project, you have to really look at it on its own and to see whether or not it will survive.
Yeah, and I think the next panel is going to be talking about different types of due diligence that you want to do when looking at projects. But Kai, I'm going to ask the same question to you.
Thanks, Joey. And again, when you're looking at any EB5 project, it starts with job creation, and because the goal is, the number one goal is to obtain that permanent residence card. Well, what's the likelihood? Is it more likely than not that the project will create sufficient jobs for the investors in the project who have invested in that partnership or in that new commercial enterprise? Secondly, who's the developer, and what's the track record of the developer? Next, who's the regional center? What's the track record of the regional center? COVID has impacted nearly every market and every socioeconomic corner of the planet. Psychologically, physiologically, environmentally, everything has been impacted by COVID. So the investor who's looking to invest, now they have to consider a new risk. What is that risk that COVID has implanted in that particular project? No one saw COVID coming, but now they can. So they have to consider what is the likelihood that the project will be impacted or not impacted, or will be able to survive something like a pandemic. Certainly unpredictable. Our current project, Cmb Group 79, is released, and it takes advantage of the e-commerce sector, certainly a growing sector within the economy as a result of COVID. People are staying home, they're shopping, no more brick and mortar, they're shopping online, and our current development is a industrial logistics facility in Detroit, Michigan region. It's with a developer, Hillwood Development Company, who is a top-tier developer, and the tenant, who has signed a 15-year lease. 15-year lease as is one of the top 5 e-commerce retailers around the globe. So it is a project that has a tenant that has a long-term lease already in place. It has a developer who's already done 32 different projects with CMB and using Eb5 funds. There is no developer, no regional center that has used Eb5 funds more frequently or more successfully than the CMB and Hillwood partnership. And the job creation is as a result of capital expenditures. The projects are moving forward, they're fully funded, and so it ticks all of the boxes when you take a look at what is a good project, not only today, but a project that will be in the future, and whether or not it will survive. This is being built and constructed and developed into the teeth of the COVID-19, and it takes advantage of the new dynamic and the new relationship that people have with retailing and purchases by building an online facility that'll be used for an online retailer, one of the top tier online retailers around the globe. And so it's a pretty amazing project.
Great, and Brent, I want you to have the opportunity to answer the same question.
Sure, I think everybody has mentioned various important aspects of selecting a project that is capable of being successful in this current pandemic environment. And part of that is also working with a regional center team that will treat you as a partner to your investment, will be transparent and share with you whatever information you need, and be totally open to how the project is being managed, what layers of entities are built into the project, and keeps you up to date on a regular basis with progress. For the South Face Village project, which is under the Green Mountains Regional Center, this is a second phase. The first phase we used no Eb5, we just use traditional bank loan financing, and that was an already successful project pre-pandemic. We've begun construction on the second phase, which does use a tranche of Eb5 funds, and the first building includes 7 luxury residential units. 6 of those 7 are already sold out, and we're not even done with construction of the building. So what we're seeing is, although we're in a rural area, we are located in the Northeast. Again, our regional center is headquartered in Connecticut. This project is located in an area where people that live in New York City, Boston, and other urban, what's called tri-state area and surrounding states, are looking for a refuge, not only for the pandemic, but into the future as we see changes in how people work. They don't need to go in the office 5 days a week anymore. They can work from home for a couple, 3 days a week. They're looking for a refuge to be able to escape higher populated areas and be able to actually have outside entertainment, whether that be skiing, hiking, riding bike with the family. So we've really seen a boost during the pandemic in our sales and in the interest for the next phases of this Eb5 offering. I know the next group will get into due diligence, et cetera, but it is a question of concern with certain projects out there. What potential ramifications are there if you're in a project that is being impacted by COVID?
Yeah, I agree with all of the sentiment here, and Eb5 there's a lot of different regional centers out there. I think with COVID, we may be seeing a smaller group of regional centers and projects that are offered, but they're probably going to be stronger projects that are better structured to protect investors. So I think that's kind of where we're seeing the Eb5 market go. And then from the investor side, consulates have been closed, or they've been, doing mission critical only type services for U.S. citizens abroad. until recently. And there was a lawsuit against the Department of State. And they, recently said this month that they're going to be resuming consular services, that immigrant visas, which EB5 is exempted from some of these geographic concerns. And so we're really, really hoping to see more visas be issued, and we have, as consulates continue to open up across the world. So with that, I haven't seen any questions come up, which is why I've just kept the panel going. But if there are any questions, I think we have a few minutes that we may be able to answer one or two. And if not, I thank you for listening, and I hope you guys found it informative. Thank you to the panelists for your great insights. And
yeah, I don't.
Lindsay, we can turn it over to you if there's nothing else coming up for questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joey, and thank you everyone for your contributions here. It was an excellent discussion. I don't see any questions either, so we have a bit of a sleepy group today. But if there are questions for this group, as noted earlier, we will be providing the contact information for all of our speakers today after the webinar concludes. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to connect with you. Thank you again to our first panel. I think for time purposes, we're just going to roll right into the next one. So I'll ask the panelists for the first discussion to turn off your cameras and continue listening if you want. Our next panel here, as you can see on the screen, is African Investor Markets Outlook, Project Due Diligence, and Understanding the EB5 Process. Our moderator for this discussion is Carl Vandermeer, who is the sales director of EB5 Marketplace. Let's see, is Carl, are you, you're connecting, there you are. I will turn it over to you to lead the discussion. I have your slides, so let me know when you want them to move, and perhaps we can have each of our panelists introduce themselves quickly.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Goeiemiddag, goeienaand, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are.
Hello.
As Mackenzie said, I think we've got a little bit of someone else on the line here, but never mind. My name is Carl Vandermeer. I'm calling in from Norwalk in Connecticut. I work for EB5 Marketplace, and EB5 Marketplace is an online platform where investors can choose an EB5 project with confidence. We provide analysis, due diligence, key terms, strengths and risks on each investment, and it allows investors to choose various investments or an investment with ease. Importantly, also, we provide a rating system for each investment. So each investment has a score for immigration outcome, in other words, the likelihood of getting your green card, and for investment outcomes, so the likelihood of getting your money back in full and in a timely manner. So with that, I'd love to just get the panel to introduce themselves. We've got a great panel here today for the second half of the discussion, and with further ado, maybe I can hand over to Julene to briefly introduce herself and her regional center.
Sure, thank you, Carl. Hello, everyone. My name is Julene Calais. I am the Vice President of Business Development for EB5 Capital. We're a regional center located in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. We're one of the oldest regional centers in this industry. We have raised approximately $800 million of EB5 funds across 28 past projects from investors that represent 70 countries around the world. So we've completed that full cycle of EB5 with permanent residency and repayment of capital many times. In addition to EB5, we have other services, including private equity investments and secondary passports. I want to say thank you to IIUSA and the chambers for putting this together. I've been working with investors since 2012 in this industry, and I'm happy to make this as informative as possible for our viewers.
Thanks, Julene. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Ryan. I am Managing Director for Atlantic American Partners. We are a part of a 46-year-old investment banking and private equity fund manager. And I've been working primarily covering Africa for the last 3 years myself. And prior to that, I lived in Malawi, Africa for 12 years. So I'm quite familiar with the African continent. We have produced 35 projects successfully, and we've helped 700 families in the immigration process. And we want to thank the sponsors for today. And I think you as viewers, it'll be helpful. We're going to have some good discussion on what it takes to make this a viable investment. So welcome.
Thanks, Daniel. And last but not least, Sonia, another fellow South African. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. Yes, I also want to thank the Johannesburg Chamber and the other chambers, to my colleagues that I've worked with extensively over the years, having a chamber background myself, and appreciate the support in our Eb5 event today with IIUSA. I'm Sonia Clark. I'm the Regional Director for First Pathway Partners. I'm based in South Africa and in Johannesburg, and I look after the whole of the African continent. A bit of history on First Pathway Partners. Mr. Bob Kraft founded First Pathway Partners in 2008. We were then the 21st regional center out of 900. We do have a 100% success rate securing permanent green cards and funds returned. We've also generated over $1 billion $1 billion US in economic development. And we've also assisted hundreds of investors and families from over 40 countries. Thank you very much for IIUSA for having me on today.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Maybe we can move on to the next slide. There we go. So just to put South Africa in context from an Eb5 perspective, the numbers out of South Africa are not huge. And unfortunately, the country statistics that we get from USCIS are a little bit dated. But nevertheless, you can see that South Africa back in 2018 and for the prior number of years had roughly 40 filings, per annum. This number definitely would have picked up in 2019, ahead of the investment increase in November of 2019. There was a significant increase globally in Eb5 filings, and South Africa would have been no different. And we certainly saw that as well, and I'm sure the panelists can testify to that. I think what we then experienced in 2020 was quite a dramatic drop in filings, and the previous panel sort of alluded to this as well. But obviously due to the investment increase, there was a significant decline in investors, but also there were less projects on the market. And the regulations tightened the rules around TEAs, and quite a few urban projects in particular were not qualified for TEA. They didn't have the TEA status. So there were less investments available in 2020 as well. And in fact, if you look at the official statistics, there were only 114 filings in the first 9 months of 2020. Versus around 6,600 the previous year. So it was a dramatic slowdown in the whole industry. I think what we've seen this year so far, 2021, has been a steady pickup in investors. I think people have adjusted to the higher investment amount. And I think panelists can certainly testify to this as well, that we've seen quite a bit of renewed interest in Eb5. I think what we're also seeing is in terms of projects, and Joey alluded to this as well, there are less projects out there, but they tend to be higher quality projects. They've matured in the sense that they have, they're fully financed, or they're further down the road in terms of construction, or they've in fact completed construction, generating cash flow, etc. So there's less financial risk, I think, in terms of some of the projects out there. I definitely consider them to be very high quality Eb5 investments. I think the other statistic to be aware of is approval rates. Eb5 is considered a very a safe option in terms of getting your green card. And the latest statistics for approval rates for South Africans was back in Q1 2019, 22 investors, all of them were approved, so 100% approval rate. If you looked at that compared to an 85% approval rate for all countries. So, in that sense, it's still a very successful program in terms of getting your green card. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Thanks, Mackenzie. Just looking at some of the two other most significant markets in Africa for EB5 is Nigeria and Egypt. Also, the statistics are a little dated here, but Nigeria had roughly 34 filings on average for the last number of years. Both Nigeria and Egypt, which is a slightly smaller market, would have seen a significant pickup in 2019, as we've seen in all other markets. But more recently, Nigeria was impacted by the travel ban, which was mentioned earlier as well. But that's been lifted by the Biden administration. We're going to chat about the other African markets a little later in the discussion, so maybe we can move to the next slide. And I'd like to sort of bring Julene in maybe, and if you could maybe just talk a little bit about some of the South African families that you've helped, Julene, and what their motivations were.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carl. So I looked back at our database this past week, and I started reflecting on, okay, what are the characteristics of South African investors that we've signed up? And I've noticed, first of all, a lot of strong cultural ties to the Netherlands and the UK. And it's really not unusual for a South African investor that starts talking to us about EB5 to already have a secondary passport. So that's one. Another thing that I've noticed is when you explain about the EB5 process and the projects to South Africans, you have one point of contact that you're explaining the process to. And if you end up signing up that investor, it's not unusual that he'll attract or she'll attract a cluster of other applicants. Often siblings, parents, cousins of those South African investors end up following that point of contact. So for example, in 2019, I spoke with one investor and 6 applicants ended up joining part of that family. So the South African investors, compared to some other markets, tend to be on the more sophisticated side, and they ask a lot of questions. But if you have the diligence and you answer them thoroughly, it's most certainly rewarding. And then in terms of industries where these investors work and where they come from, 45% of our clients work in the manufacturing and construction industry, which is really in line with South Africa's economy as a whole. And then once the South Africans do EB5 and they relocate to the United States, another trend I've noticed is that they end up settling in warmer climates, like Florida is extremely popular for South Africans. In terms of source of funds, we've noticed, and we don't get too involved in the source of funds because we leave that up to the immigration attorney, of course, but it's typically income, inheritance, investments, real estate, sale of property is very popular, and trusts. So a lot of South African families accumulate their wealth in trusts, and it's very important to hire an attorney that has worked with South African clients to document the source and path of funds, and then also that has experience with the remittance restrictions. So the Sars Clearance and the 10 million Rand, anything beyond that, right, needs a special application. So these are some characteristics that I've noticed working with South Africans on the why, real briefly, why they do EB5. While they live luxuriously in South Africa, and if the future of their children is dim, the US offers a lot greater opportunity for advancement, their personal safety, economic security, future stability. And then I've noticed conversations talk a lot about widespread corruption. And it's really sad because some of our clients have said how beautiful their country is and they really don't want to leave. But these are some of the factors at play. And I completely agree. I've been to South Africa and I think it's a fantastic country. But it's sad that these are some of the drivers that are pushing some of the South Africans out.
Thanks, Julie. No, it certainly is beautiful, Dan, and I can see from your background picture there, that's where I'm from. That is the most beautiful city in the world.
Yeah, just to add on, first of all, I agree with you, and that's partly why I put this photo up. I've been traveling to Cape Town and Johannesburg and Durban for the last 3 years quite a bit. And just to piggyback on what Julene said, many of the clients that I've worked with, the first question that I ask them is, what a beautiful place, what a great country. Why? What is your number one reason for talking to me? And, the first look they have is, well, I really don't want to leave because I love South Africa, but there's issues that I need to deal with. And I think that's, every country has issues. And in most cases, and Julien's right, most of the clients that I've personally worked with over the last 3 years in South Africa specifically, the primary reason is they want to give their children an opportunity to attend universities and public schools at a much lower and more reasonable price than the school fees that they're paying in South Africa, and get rid of some of the corruption and the political issues. So it's a difficult choice, because in many cases they don't necessarily want to leave, but they feel compelled because of their children's future. And I can understand. I have a daughter, and I understand that. And so that's, I think, a big part of why families are talking to us and other regional centers for this type of program, is because you really look at the future for your children and you say, where's the best place for my child in the long run? And that's why this Eb5 program makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And I would add there are significant savings to, tuition costs if you're a green card holder versus.
That's, I think that, for folks out there from South Africa that are viewing, you really should, talk to us, talk to, people that are aware. But school fees, for example, in most parts of America, the public schools for primary and secondary, there are no school fees, zero. It's paid through our real estate taxes. And generally in most higher income areas and zip codes, which you folks would more than likely end up in, they're high quality schools. I mean, my daughter will attend a public school that's ranked as one of the 10 top public school districts in the state of Florida. So, and I will pay no school fees up until she goes to university.
Thanks, Dan. Sonia, anything you could add to this in terms of other considerations that South Africans or other motivations for leaving?
Absolutely. So we obviously have the educational benefits, obviously, which has just been mentioned. We've consulted with Dr. Kate Green, an expert in education. And one thing I want to say that while you are waiting for your I-526 approval, your children can actually enter the United States education system online, especially with COVID. The other thing is there's some other relevant issues. Unfortunately, most of us has been affected by crime, and it's violent crime, whether we've been directly, indirectly, or our families or our friends have been affected. I think that's a big driving factor, for people to look for investment elsewhere and to relocate their family, in a safe, secure environment. So the other consideration is the state of our medical care. Our medical care is of grave concern at the moment, and I think if one would rather be treated in a first world country or a country like South Africa, I think that is the obvious choice. So you got all the added benefits. I mean, food security is also another element in terms of where the African continent is going. And I know there's a big focus on agriculture, but I think in terms of the experts, it is our last hope, for Africa, is in actual fact agriculture and food security. So yes, and I would also say that from our point of view, our investors, their children are generally very young, or they're about to turn 21. And, just to have a consideration, you need to actually have applied for your Eb5 for you and your family before your children, reach the age of 21. We've also done a comparison in terms of business people. whether it's L1 or EB5, and EB5 outweighs that, when one actually gets down to the cost, and the risk attached, for a business person, I would say yes, EB5, because then the whole family benefits from the petition.
Thanks, Sonia. Mackenzie, maybe we can move on to the next slide here. Just looking at some of the sort of considerations, and some of this has been touched on as well, but love to hear our panel's thoughts on this. Obviously, one of the major impacts or considerations is the investment amount, which has gone up. It went from $500,000, which at the time was roughly 7.5 million rand, to $900,000 now, which is close to 13 million rand, which is it's a big amount. But as we've said, I think if you put that into the context of investing in your family's future in the US, it certainly, I would argue, still a worthwhile price. And obviously the investment does come back to you. So it's not a sunk cost. Julene, maybe you can just chat a little bit about the impact that COVID's had on some investments. I know this has been discussed as well previously, but love to hear your thoughts on that and how investors should be navigating around that.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So the COVID impact, first I'll speak on investors and then I'll speak on projects. I think for investors in South Africa, even before the pandemic, South Africa had several years of low growth, 1% and lower. And it has one of the highest inequality rates in the world. So as growth slowed in recent years, the wealthy South Africans started making plans to emigrate even before COVID, right? And wanted to move their assets overseas. And we saw from the trend a few slides ago that the South African market didn't really pick up until 2014, 2015. And this is in line with the overall economy. And then during the pandemic, South Africa contracted 7%, right? So much of the economy depends on mining, on manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism has been really hit hard, which is another big sector. So the pressure on this economy is even more of a consideration for those that can afford EB5 at the $900,000 level. So in terms of projects, I'd say, we have a lot of experience in multifamily and hospitality. Right now, given the environment, and this is over the past, compared to 2020 to now where we are. Last year, we were out of the market. We didn't have any new projects until the very end of last year when we opened a multifamily deal. We had a lot of successes where we had 2 projects start construction. We had 3 projects open to the public. Investors were repaid. We hit that $100 million mark of repayment to clients. We had a lot of successes, but we were not raising funds for obvious reasons. Now, I think given the current environment, I'd say if I were an investor, multifamily projects are where I would invest. In multifamily, these are residential units, rental apartments, right? Commercial real estate. So the reason why is because, these types of asset classes, the multifamily asset class has weathered the 2020 recession better than most real estate asset classes. And there are, according to CBRE and these other big firms, multifamily is on the path to full recovery in 2021 and early 2022. So it's one of the safest, it's one of the most stable. We've done close to a dozen multifamily deals, and the ones that are operational, even during the pandemic, were operating at above 90%, especially in the DC area. And that's not to say that during the pandemic, it hasn't been difficult for developers that do multifamily. So lots of concessions have been made, 2 to 3 months of free rent. The absorption rate for lease ups has been a lot slower. But overall, compared to other asset classes, they've been a lot more stable. So I would say, look at asset class when, if you're considering doing EB5 during this period. And then in terms of hospitality, which is another asset class that we have a lot of experience with, right before COVID hit, we almost went into the market with a Marriott hotel. in Southern Florida. And we pulled that out, thankfully, very quickly. And like the rest of the industry, our hotel portfolio has experienced low occupancy rates, they've lost revenue. It's going to take a while to recover, but we are already seeing them steadily climb back up. Those occupancy rates are on the upward trend. Our asset management team, they're monitoring these projects very carefully. And funny enough, within hospitality, there are a few types of hotels that have done okay. So hotels located near popular wine regions during the pandemic, people were still, they're spending more time outside. And then the extended stay hotels, like a Residence Inn, that are located near airports where people need to quarantine, those kinds of hotel projects have done all right as compared to others. But at the end of the day, if I were an investor and I need to do EB5 right now, I would say the types of projects that I would look at would be a multifamily deal for EB5 for the reasons that I described.
Thanks, Jolene. And Sonia, obviously, South Africa has foreign exchange controls and there's taxation considerations in terms of becoming a green card holder. Maybe you could chat a little bit about those two aspects and some things to be aware of.
Yes, sure. We've actually just done a series of tax and foreign exchange webinars. We have very close relationships with service providers that can assist clients, a choice of whichever service provider they want to use, whether it be their own bank or whether it be somebody else on the Forex side that's actually going to save them some money. I think, South Africa needs to get a little bit more creative in terms of keeping all the eggs in one basket. So yes, all our high net worth investors that have still got all their rands in South Africa and have not diversified their portfolio, there are ways in which one can actually diversify your portfolio, which will make it easier for you to actually invest those funds into an EB5 project or with your regional center. So when one looks at the DTA, the double taxation agreements between various countries, we do have mechanisms. We're not going to discuss that on this platform, but there are mechanisms still within the African continent, funny enough, that one can actually get more relaxed exchange controls, in terms of, investing your funds in the United States under EB5.
Okay, and Dan, what are you advising clients in terms of their timelines for EB5?
That's a great question. And obviously, folks that are viewing, you'll see different statistics, and I would caution you to be careful because the statistics can be a little bit distorted. But I will give you a practical example. I personally have a client from South Africa. We submitted and got, he and his wife were approved in 9 months for an I-526. So that was unusual because generally we tell our clients expect up to 24 months to plan accordingly. So one of the silver linings of COVID was because there was such a drop in applications, the processing time in certain cases, we got our client in this case early, but to say the least, our South African client was very pleased to get notification that their initial submittal package was approved in roughly 9 months. So, but folks out there, don't take that as a consistent time frame. I would suggest, again, we look at from, the time frame, it's broken into 2 categories, and the earlier panel broke it out in more detail, but relatively speaking, plan on about 2 years, give or take, for the first part. And that's a good mechanism for you to plan for your purposes. That's the part that actually allows you to come to the United States and bring your family and live and work and select anywhere in the United States you want to live or work, and or both. And one of the things I wanted to mention, just to tap on what Jolene said, you as an investor, folks in South Africa, and by the way, I want to say hello to other people, other folks in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Egypt, other places around Africa that are watching. We're not excluding you, so welcome. But one of the things I want to mention is each investor has the choice And that's one of the reasons we have these webinars. You can kind of do your own research and choose the type of investment you want to get involved in, and the type of regional center you want to get involved in, and the type of financing structure you want to get involved in. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But you have a choice to go a variety of routes. And I think it's important that you understand that as part of due diligence, you can look at different ways to give yourself greater comfort.
Excellent, thanks, Dan. And Sonia, just E2 is another option that some people may have to get into the US. Just briefly, maybe if you could give us some pros and cons of E2 versus EB5. I know you're somewhat involved in the E2 market as well.
Absolutely, yes. We're extensively involved in the E2 market. We found, particularly last year through COVID, not just South Africa, but all the other African countries, all our investors that have been working with us very closely. The E2 is a non-immigrant visa. So, one has to bear in mind that if you are going to enter the E2 and the US under the E2 treaty visa, that firstly, you need to actually, your passport and your home country needs to be economic treaty country. So basically what happens is you'll have to get a second citizenship to an E2 treaty country, and only then will you be allowed to enter the United States under the E2 visa program. So we do, as First Pathway Partners, we've created a solution in terms of an E2 treaty passport, and then from there the route through to EB5 is actually E2. So we look at projects that we've carefully vetted, had very successful investors in certain of our projects, where you can either own your E2 or own your EB5, so you have to invest a certain amount of funds. And the benefit, I think, of looking E2 to EB5 is if you are under time constraints, you can be in the United States within a period of around about 6 months. Once you are there, let's for instance say you've invested $300,000 US into an E2 investment, you only have the balance of 600,000, and then obviously you would change your petition status from E2 to EB5, and working with a regional center, your benefit sits there, just to simplify. So EB5 is your immigrant visa and E2 is a non-immigrant visa.
I'd like to add, if I may, and I think we'll talk about this in a moment on a slide or two, but folks out there, be careful of marketing that implies that there's these really quick ways to get to the United States. And what Sonia is referring to in an E2, it's a completely different program than E5. And I just caution you to be very, very careful.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think that's a good point. I mean, we have had clients as well that have basically decided E2 was a good interim option, but EB5 is really a much more permanent solution that suits them. And so I think you've got to be very aware of the difference between the programs. Maybe Julene, if I could bring you in again, in terms of a typical EB5 project, is there such a thing? Is there a safer type of project? I think you did touch on, multi-housing projects, but maybe you can chat to us a little bit more about some of the different kinds of projects you see in general in EB5.
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of great projects out there, and you have to look at the project as a whole, right? Not just asset class that I was focusing on earlier. I think there are benefits right now during COVID, but there are many other aspects to projects to make them safe bet projects, or in other words, to mitigate as much risk as possible. I think before even looking at a project, I think in this industry, there's too often a focus on the project first, whereas given my experience, I think it's wise to first narrow down your regional centers that have a proven track record of taking clients through that full EB5 cycle for the I-526, I-829, and return of capital, and have done that over and over again with 100% project approval rate. Once you have narrowed down the regional center, and that mitigates a lot of risk, and then I would talk to a couple different regional centers that have those good track records and ask them, what projects do you have available? Meanwhile, it's important to get your source of funds and lined up and work with your immigration attorney so that you don't miss that window of time to join the project, right? You want to be ready to invest when you start looking at deals. So in terms of the project, I think there are many different aspects of the project that would mitigate risk. I think, first of all, having a reputable developer that has a proven success as well, working with the specific asset class in that specific location, maybe has even worked with the regional center before. These are ways to determine that the developer is good. A developer with deep pockets too is also very helpful. And then the project's location, right? Understanding what are the demand drivers for that project to be successful. So is there population growth? Are there lots of nearby employers where, if it's a multifamily building, tenants will be attracted to the building and want to live there. And then if the occupancy rate is high, then there's steady cash flow. Healthy cash flow leads to a higher chance of repayment down the road. Looking at the capital stack, right? That's also important. So the capital stack is the financing for the project as a whole. So in addition to EB5 funds, what are the other players that are involved in financing that project? How much is the developer putting in? That's skin in the game, right? In addition to that, is there a senior lender, right? Is there a bank that's also willing to provide financing for the project, and they've done their own due diligence, right? So that mitigates risk. And then of course, job creation, right? So understanding the economic impact report and the methodology that's used, how many jobs will be created, is there enough coverage for all the investors in that deal? And down the road, once the immigration piece is over, it's that repayment of capital that's so important. And before you invest in a project, understanding the documents, understanding the exit strategy. Is it a sale? Is it a refinance? What has the developer done in the past? Does it make sense, right? The investors should be truly comfortable before joining and understand all these different elements that I've outlined.
That's a great summary. Thanks, Jadine. Dan, could you chat a little bit about some of the different financing structures you typically find in EB5 and the pros of each?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jolene did a good job. And I think, let me just make a comment. What she was referring to our viewers is there's a tremendous amount of due diligence involved for you as a potential investor to look at. There's so many different ways you can pursue this. And I will put in just a subtle suggestion. There are groups like Carl's who will help you with the due diligence process. And in certain cases, we kind of encourage that, because for you as an investor, it could get a bit overwhelming to talk to 3 or 4 regional centers and do due diligence on each center and then do due diligence on projects. By the time you do all this due diligence, you're exhausted. And my point is that there are groups out there that will help you. And I know Carl is going to, there's going to be some form of a cup of coffee involved in this comment, but I'll say it anyhow. But regarding financing, folks, there's different viewpoints. Our firm is it's actually the only one in this industry. If you look at that third, we do what's called a diversified fund approach. And our firm is different. It's private equity. Your investment becomes part of a private equity fund. But what we do is we make you a partner with us in the fund, and we combine 3 or 4 properties into a diversified private equity fund, whereby what's the advantage to you? The advantage is when we sell these properties, we share the profits with you as an investor. And so what that means is, in addition to your return of your investment, there's the possibility for appreciation, which makes it different than either the equity or debt model. So we're unique in that respect, and that's what we focused on. We've been doing that for 10 years. And a lot of our clients like that because they feel like they're part of the ownership of the project and the ownership of the capital appreciation. So that's really what separates our firm from many of the others.
Thanks, Dan. That's great. I think, Julene, maybe you've answered some of these questions already in terms of what questions I should be asking. But I think some of the things that we would focus on, when we do due diligence on a project from an immigration perspective would obviously be, I-5 to 6 approvals, your job creation. Is there an exemplar? What sort of denial languages have they used in terms of an potential I-5 to 6 denial? If you look at the financial aspect, things like how much equity is in the project in terms of the developer, as you've mentioned, is this a fully financed project? What's the exit strategy? What sort of security interest is there? And in general, is there any third-party oversight? Are there any conflicts of interest? All those sorts of things obviously are important, but and again, you may have touched on this already, but are there any additional sort of obvious areas that an investor should be focusing on?
Yeah, I think you brought up several good points. And then I would add the timeline of the project, right? Are you an investor that's joining a project that has already broken ground and has already received entitlements and building permits and all the different licenses required for the developer to obtain? That mitigates a lot of risk as well, right? I think that's something that I would consider strongly as an investor to pass that stage. Years ago, I remember we would go out into the market and raise money around the world prior to breaking ground, and that was the norm in the industry. But I do think that it's great that now investors are looking more at projects that have already broken ground, and that does mitigate a lot of risk.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And Dan, could you maybe just tell us a little bit how important an exemplar approval is and what that is?
Yeah, it's a little bit complex, but in a sense, you submit to the USCIS in advance an approval of the property to be developed. So in certain cases, we will do that. It just depends on the type of project and the risk of project. And as Julene states, the timing of different developments, especially given COVID and now post-COVID, there are certain projects that are going to be in demand quicker than others. So I would just caution our viewers, don't rely solely on whether a project has an exemplar, because there are some not so great projects that have exemplar approval. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great project. It just means it was approved at that stage. So I would just caution our viewers to be careful in that respect.
Thanks, Dan. Sonia, any issues in particular that investors should be on the lookout for in terms of possible pitfalls?
Yes, I think, Carl, there's a lot of false advertising that is going around the Eb5 space, particularly in South Africa. In terms of the first panel today, on the IIUSA event, they addressed the timelines. We've also addressed them here. One cannot actually say to any investor, oh, you would be in the United States within just over a year, or, as we heard, you've had an I-5 to 6 approval within 9 months, but we don't know. Your petition needs to go in, and it is entirely up to USCIS in terms of how long your petition will take, and depending on how many petitions they've got to go through. So you may just be very fortunate that your petition was on the top of the pile and you got an early approval. But in general terms, 18 to 24 months, I would agree with the other panelists. Maximum 24 months is what one can look for. And yes, I just think once you do your homework and your due diligence in terms of what is being put out there, question it. Do your homework on the regional center. Firstly, do your homework on the project. Do your homework on the on the actual developer itself, and look at the track record. And then also your immigration attorney. You need a highly experienced immigration attorney to be able to take you through the process. So, I think each regional center, works with each investor in a certain way. We like to handhold right through the whole process. And yes, I think it's up to each investor where they feel most comfortable. But I do say do not just accept whatever's out in the media as written in stone.
And Carl, if I can just add something, with this slide, and we're talking about due diligence and all these questions that investors need to ask, I just want to make the point that this doesn't have to be complicated. We don't want people to feel overwhelmed. How do I narrow down my projects and regional centers? There are lots of good resources out there. I think, groups like IIUSA, Carl's group, Eb5 Marketplace, and then immigration attorneys. While it's important that the immigration attorney doesn't get involved in advising projects and regional centers, there are lots of FAQs out there that they can provide and help guide you. And then the regional center, of course, we want you to sign up to our project, but we have a robust team with people from all around the world, and we can guide you through that process. We can help you think of the questions that you may not be asking. And there have been cases in the past where we've helped compare our project to others, and we've let some investors go because we truly do think, okay, I think that you're in good hands if you want to go with that regional center and that project. I think you'll be just fine. And that makes us just as happy that those investors are having a good Eb5 immigration experience. So there are a lot of good resources out there. And if you don't know what questions to ask, the ones that we're bringing up today, there are lots of people that can help you with coming up with those set of due diligence questions.
That's a great point, Julene. Yeah, no, it shouldn't have to be overwhelming. There is, you're right, there's plenty of people that can help. I think maybe we can move to the next slide, Mackenzie. So Dan and Julene, I know you've been quite active in some other African markets. Maybe just love to hear your perspective on some of the other African markets and any sort of peculiarities associated with them. Is there, for example, is there exchange control in the other African markets like Nigeria as well? Is that an issue that, yeah?
Okay, I'll tackle Nigeria and Kenya because I've worked with clients in both of those countries. Nigeria, as the earlier panel mentioned, folks that are watching from Nigeria, thank goodness the travel ban has been removed. So that makes it a lot better for everybody. We've got quite a few, Nigeria is a robust market. I've spent probably 4 weeks in Lagos, in Abuja, the last couple of years. And I really see that as, there's tremendous opportunities for people in Nigeria. The impact of the oil prices have impacted wealth to some degree, but the country is growing, and there's opportunities in Nigeria and Kenya in particular with high tech, and there's fintech companies coming out of the woodworks that are really creating, they call it the Silicon Savannah in Kenya, which is the Nairobi area. So I just think that there's a lot of opportunities for folks in all of these countries to pursue EB5s. And with regard to your question, are there limitations? Yes, each country does have their own control mechanisms, and it's fluid because of COVID and because of currency. It's, folks that are in those countries, you need to contact your reserve banks and find out what that is. But I will say that we have been very active in Nigeria and Kenya. Ethiopia is an area that are becoming more and more active, and I'll be in Addis here probably in the next 6 to 9 months. But yeah, we think, my role is to cover Africa, and as living personally in Malawi, I see the potential for EB5 in all of these countries and perhaps a few more.
Yeah, great points, Dan. I'd say, when we look at Africa as a whole, the three richest countries are Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt. We're active in all three of these countries for EB5. We also have investors from Angola, Algeria, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, 10 different countries across Africa as a whole. With Nigeria, our first investor that came through was back in 2013. She was from Lagos. She was studying law at Georgetown University in DC when she applied for EB5, and she's an intellectual property lawyer now, and she finished her EB5 cycle. She's repaid. And we have a few dozen Nigerians with very similar profiles as her. I do think, with COVID and the country being very sensitive to oil prices, Nigerians are really thinking twice during this period about their Plan B options. I think also another characteristic for Nigerians that I've noticed is when it comes to trusting, right? So Nigeria is a very relationship-based society as opposed to task-based. So the trust is built, and I'm sure Dan's experienced this in Nigeria with sharing meals, having evening drinks, and building the relationship over time, right? And it's very important to have many referrals, whether through attorneys and past investors that can support your regional center and say that the project's good, and I know people that have gone through EB5 with them. So that reinforcement is very important to Nigerians and a lot of other countries. But I think my advice might be to maybe consider a little bit more, have an open mind to take a task-based approach, right? So these are countries like Germany and Denmark and the UK, where that would be businesses built through, relationships built through like business-related activities and answering questions very diligently and showing that you're reliable through your work. That's how trust is built in those types of societies. And I think I'd say, to not just follow other Nigerians that have done EB5 and think that you'll be successful, to take maybe a little bit more of a task-based approach in that sense. Something I've noticed about Nigeria as well is, when you look, and this is the case for Ethiopia too, when you look at the hubs in the United States, for Nigeria, Texas and Maryland are the two regions where a lot of Nigerians settle. So I think that's led to a lot of success for us because we're based out of Washington, DC. Our office is technically in Maryland. So we have a strong network in this region, and a lot of our projects are in the Washington, DC area. And for Ethiopia, while it's not a big EB5 market, 75% of all Ethiopians in the United States are in the Washington, DC region. So I think that's largely why we've been successful with that market within Africa. Egypt, I'll quickly touch upon since that is a strong market. It falls into our MENA market for our firm. We've noticed the majority of Ethiopians that do EB5 are expats that are in the Gulf countries that are working there and earning a living in other currencies, right? And they do EB5 because they want to secure a stable home in a foreign country, because in these Gulf countries, right, they only provide residency as long as they're working there. So they're really trying to provide for the future of their family. And since 2016, there's been a big drop of Ethiopian applicants because of the devaluation of the currency. And if we go back a few slides earlier, we can see that with the IIUSA trends that we described. But we have a very good team, and we have a staff member that's originally from Cairo. She works with us out of Washington, DC, but has been in Cairo for the past few months, meeting with clients. So those are some of the characteristics and some advice. I'd say the advice is really the same in terms of approaching EB5 across the board, no matter where you come from. I think you'll be successful if you follow a few of the things that we've been talking about today.
Great, thanks, Julene.
And let me add, Julene, this is one of the challenges of these webinars is we always run into I see we're at 51 minutes and counting, but I just wanted to comment, she's spot on. Julene, you're spot on with everything. And the one thing that really, I think that the folks from Africa that are watching us, relationships are everything. That the culture throughout the continent is based on, and Carl and Sonia, you know this in South Africa. You know, I spent days having lunches and cocktails and dinner, getting to know people because they want to make sure, and vice versa. We want to understand their needs before we move forward. And it really is, it's part of the fun, quite candidly, of the business is really developing that relationship. And throughout Africa, and you know, as living there, you know, a meal can last 3 or 4 hours. So it's a fun part of the business, and folks out there, I think, understand what we're referring to.
I agree. Excellent. Maybe we can move on to the next slide, please, Mackenzie. Yeah, just maybe we should just have a quick, you know, 1-minute round and just everyone on their sort of final thoughts in terms of what advice you'd give to a prospective South African or African EB5 investor. Sonia, would you like to kick that off?
Certainly. One thing that I'm actually meant to mention earlier is, you know, and I did touch on the importance of your immigration attorney. So my advice would be not to take any legal advice from anyone other than a US qualified immigration attorney. You know, under US law, that is the only route you need to go. I'd like to say in closing as well, I'm based in Johannesburg in South Africa. You know, I'm on the ground, I'm in the same, you know, on the same time zone. So it's easier for us to communicate, et cetera, et cetera. So really in closing, I would like to encourage the investors that have chosen the Eb5 project to work closely with their regional center. There's no need to get, you know, advice from all over the place. So between your regional center, and which is your approved regional center, and your immigration attorney, you'd be in the best hands. Thank you, Cole.
Thanks, Sonia. Dan?
Well, I would just say thank you to the viewers. I think that, you know, we really appreciate your time. And in closing, I would say that for our firm, it's just about track record. Our clients are pleased. We're happy to help. And we have a track record of not only getting the green cards approved, but returning capital and returning some appreciation on top of the capital. So it's all about performance and it's about relationships. So thank you all, and we look forward to talking to you.
Thanks, Dan and Julene. Doesn't look like we have any questions either, so I'll love to hear your sort of closing thoughts, and maybe I can wrap it up.
Sure. So advice that I would give potential investors looking at Eb5. First, this is the approach I would take. I would say, first, ask yourself these questions. Do I want to immigrate to America? Do I have the funds necessary, right? $900,000 is a lot of money for some people. And can I prove that those funds were lawfully obtained? Do I have documentation to do so? So these are the questions that I would ask. I would sit down with the family, make sure everyone's on board first, right? Then secondly, I'd say identify your team. Who's your Eb5 team here? And that, I think IIUSA, first of all, has a lot of great resources, so that's a good place to start. I'd say your team consists of the regional center. You know, we're all regional centers here on the panel today, and there are several good regional centers out there with a track record. So that track record, to me, if I'm an investor, would be full Eb5 cycle, conditional green card, permanent green card, money back. I wouldn't consider regional centers that haven't taken clients through that full cycle. That's number one. Number two, I'd find the immigration attorney that has experience with your country, right? Filing Eb5 cases, whether it's from South Africa or from Nigeria, and not have only filed cases, but have been successful in those markets. So that's really key. And then another part of your team could include, and this is to Sonia's point, right? It's regional center and immigration attorney are two very important players. But if you do need additional resources, right? Like Carl's company, but financial advisors, right? Wealth management teams, certified public accountants. If you have these resources available to you, I'd say use them and put them in touch with the regional center to make direct contact and so that communication is clear and everyone's on board. Then after identifying the team, even before looking at the project, the third piece would be look at the project, right? What is the project that's being offered? And then you can ask all those due diligence questions and use your team to help you with those resources, developer capital stack, topics that we brought up today. And the more you ask questions, good regional centers are transparent, they're honest, they'll readily provide the information you need. They'll show proof that they've been successful. And they may even connect you with some past clients from your market if that gives you an extra level of comfort. And I think if you do all those things, you're very likely to be successful in EB5. I think strong communication between all these players is very, very important.
Thanks, Julene. And yeah, I'd just like to finally thank Mackenzie and IIUSA. I think great job that they're doing promoting the industry and the program. And I think these are very helpful webinars. Really appreciate you arranging this, Mackenzie, and giving us an opportunity to present ourselves. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Carl, for those kind words. Thank you to all of our panelists, Dan, Julene, Sonia, as well as our first panel of the day. I thought both discussions were quite insightful. I hope listeners found value from our presentation as well. If you missed any of the discussion, we will make the recording available here shortly for your listening pleasure. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for this event. As previously noted, everyone who participated today is a member of IIUSA, so thank you to all of our member organizations as well around the world. With that, I think other than longing to be in South Africa or Nigeria or Egypt or anywhere else for that matter, I think we can wrap things up, but do look forward to being back in person as soon as possible and look forward to working with our local partners in South Africa, again, the Johannesburg Chamber, the Durban Chamber, and the Nelson Mandela Business Chamber when we can return to in-person. In the interim, I think Julene plugged IIUSA a few times. Please utilize IIUSA as a resource. We have a lot of information about EB5 and the process, our members, and industry news on our website. So with that, thank you again, and I think we can call it a day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie.